Thank you so much, Chip.
No problem.
Pleasure. So I want to go back to 2008 when you founded 2U. Talk about the origin story. I know that a lot of startup founders, they're all about, like they have a desire to fill a need or to solve a problem. What were you trying to do with 2U?
Well, people honestly thought we were crazy at the time. So 2U today sounds, I hear all the time from people, oh, the company's doing great. And, I feel very blessed with how the company's doing. But back in 2008, it was a little bit of a crazy idea. The elite schools really were not doing much online. Really, at the sort of higher level of the market, there really wasn't that much activity. And what there was typically like a toe in the water of some kind. And so I know Michael Shinelli from UNC is here. Our first partners took a huge risk. If you think about the reputational risk of being the dean, Doug Shackelford, at UNC Chapel Hill B School, it's a top 20 B school. And one of the things when I talk about our partners, I often take a little bit of a counter view to what people say today, that all of US higher education is problematic and everything in the future is going to be a micro degree or a nano credential, and I'm happy to talk about that in more detail as we get into the Q&A. But ultimately, great schools offering great degrees offer a fantastic outcome. And so if you're Doug back in 2008 and we're showing up and we're saying, you know what, we promise we can take you into the digital age and make you great in the 21st century, it's a huge risk if you've been around for more than 200 years. So we don't take that lightly. We really do believe the reason the company's been successful is we think of ourselves as true brand stewards of schools that have been around for an extraordinarily long time. So 2U's 8+ years old. To put a context on it, my youngest university partner is Southern Methodist University, incredible school in Texas. They're 12 years older than Walt Disney. Companies don't last this long. So Chapel Hill and Georgetown were two of our first partners. And to put that in context, they've been around 100 years longer than Coca-Cola. Like Coca-Cola is probably the most venerable brand in the world. Some people say it's the second best known English language word in the world, hello and then Coke. So when you think about what that means, the network, the reality is people aren't getting married at the Coke factory. You form a lifelong relationship with these incredible schools from where many of you are employed. And the reality is people's lives are fundamentally changed on a permanent basis. So we took it very seriously, this notion of being brand steward. Now, the reason I say it was a little crazy
what were you hearing?
People thought we were nuts, truly. You're going to, Madam President, we'd like you to take all these online students that you've never had before, and we promise we can find great ones, which is very relevant to this. We promise we can build a great tech platform, and I want you to give them the same degree as the campus, and I want to give them the same rights and therefore the same responsibilities as the campus students. And by the way, I'd like more than half your revenue, please. And that's not how we pitched it, but on some level that was real.
Yeah.
And and I'm happy to talk about the business model, but my point is the schools that we work with are really incredible places that are generating the right kind of outcome, and I feel very fortunate to be the CEO of a company that is leading change in higher education in a way that I think is pretty profound and typically not well understood. What I would say is with a lot of attention, and we sort of lived during the birth of the MOOC, the hype of the MOOC, and the death of the MOOC on some level. And ultimately, that whole time we were here, and we were doing our thing and sort of going along, and we're behind the scenes, so we're not as well known because we're not a front end company. Our job is to promote Berkeley and Georgetown, not to promote 2U. Mm-hmm. So from that perspective, it's been an incredible journey. There's a bunch of 2Utes. I can see some sitting right there. So it was a little crazy, but we were passionate enough to believe we could pull it off. And look, it was not easy, and it still isn't easy. I mean, doing it, online education done this way is challenging, it's expensive, it's a non-trivial decision, it's a non-trivial investment. So all the above, it's not easy to do, but I really think if you look at Chapel Hill, they're celebrating their 5-year anniversary now. They were just ranked by Princeton Review yesterday as the #1 online program. There's almost 800 students enrolled, and they are fantastic students. And the reason I can talk about that is I am one of them. So oddly, I might be the only MBA student that did an IPO while in an MBA program.
Wow.
But I am almost done. I have one class left.
Congrats.
You have no idea, honestly.
almost there.
So I have one more class. I've been in this program for over half of 2U's existence.
Wow.
So I'm ready,
We were
by the
actually
way.
just speaking in the back about those, how you select students. How do you find those students who are the best of the best, who are going to go through the program and finish?
Well, I mean, this room knows that better than most groups I talk to. The reality is my job is to find the right student, not just any student. That's the hardest part of the job, is these are all elite institutions, and the reality is it's about data. You know, marketing in today's world is about data. It's about also great content, and you know, both are critical. But I didn't have the data orientation, particularly from a marketing perspective, when we started the company. And so if you look at the journey of 2U, we did several things right out of the gate, but one of the things that was really not right was the marketing side, and evolved over time by bringing in the right data orientation to the point that today we are able to predict the likelihood of enrollment the moment somebody enters the marketing funnel. And it is that predictive engine that ultimately drives the spend to make sure that it's being deployed into something that will result in finding a bit of a needle in a haystack. I mean, getting into Berkeley is not easy. So that's a big part of our journey as a company, and very proud of the people like my CMO, Harsha Mukherjee, that, you know, sort of driving that kind of change. So LinkedIn's been a critical partner. We do a ton with LinkedIn, and
Well, I want to talk about the marketing piece. We have tons of marketers here in the room. How do you think the marketing landscape has changed, and what are universities doing to really market to these excellent students?
well, you know, as I mentioned to you backstage, I'm working on this op-ed that, you know, marketing shouldn't be a dirty word in higher education. Like, marketing is about access. Marketing is about opening the door to people that may not have known that this kind of option was available. And the thing about higher education is, just if I can back up a little bit and talk about why I started the company. For me, I'm a Pell Grant recipient, first generation college graduate. If I talk about it too long, I will start tearing up, which will not surprise my colleagues that are in the audience.
Is there tissue here?
I'm a reasonably emotional character. So, but you know, I mean, just to put a fine point on it, I grew up in South Florida. I had never seen snow until I got to GW. And crazy story, we're now a public company, and I bought my first winter coat of my life with my now general counsel. So, like, GW completely changed my life. It is hard to overstate. Next week, I celebrate my 20th wedding anniversary with my wife, who I met sophomore year. Like, both personally and professionally, I wouldn't be here without GW. So I am the product of this system. And this system created the opportunity for me to have the kind of life that I have today. And you know, the problem for America is not people going to Syracuse or Berkeley or any of our partners. The problem for-profit education, which unfortunately gets tarred with one brush, is that, you know, too many people starting a culinary program, dropping out halfway and still working at Applebee's. Now, as a son of a builder, you know, I have no problem with people working at Applebee's, but that's not why they enrolled, and that's not why they are in some form of debt. So it's really about the outcome. And what I love about 2U and what I love about our marketing team is you really are opening the doors to people. Like, I'm not as much of a unicorn in the program as you would think. Like, the people that are my classmates are so exceptional and so interesting. I mean, you know, the former general counsel of an NBA team, the CFO of a major cruise line, the head of the ER of Southeast General Hospital in DC. My favorite one is a guy named Corey Broussard, who's become a real friend, because in our form of online education, our hashtag, by the way, for all the marketing people in the row is no back row. So we all know the back row, the seats closest to the exits, a refuge for minds that wander, home of the unraised hand. That's our copy. What if you could eliminate the back row and bring every student forward, because it's live instruction? But so you meet all these people, and then you physically meet each other. And so I met this guy named Corey Broussard. He's from New Orleans. He's a Shell oil engineer. He spends half of every quarter stationed on a rig in the middle of the Gulf, and he got his MBA through the program. Why? Because he's an engineer, and he knows that if he doesn't understand ultimately the balance sheet, he's not going to continue to move up on the business side. So for his personal goal, he enrolled in the program, became a very good friend of mine. At the immersions, we tended to like this one restaurant called the Crunkleton, which I could get into. But, so it's a great pub on the campus of Chapel Hill. And the reality is, we are friends. Like, I see him all the time. You don't find that connection in most of what was online education.
And going back to that op-ed, when you mentioned, marketing is a dirty word,
Sure.
how are you going about convincing schools who maybe weren't, marketing their programs to do otherwise?
Well, I mean, it's starting to become very obvious that over time, if you don't, not just market your program, yeah, it keeps popping off, I'm sorry.
Who's ever...
Not just marketing your program, but ultimately, I believe that if you look at graduate education, personally, I think the train has kind of left the station. This notion that somehow the sleeping giants are awakening, they're awake, FYI. So, when you allow a great university like Berkeley to open the doors to people and they don't have to pick up their life, quit their job, and move, you think about that. Like, why should you quit your job to move, to get an MBA, to get a job? So the single biggest cost to graduate education is your opportunity cost. And so what you've got is you've got a school that these schools are starting to get it. And, they're doing really well. So
what innovations are you seeing?
One of my, a couple that I would point to, a very cool one, is at University of Southern California. Our social work program is producing 5% of the United States social workers out of that one program. So it's really scaled. And that dean really sort of embraced the online format in a way that's really powerful. So just one of the things we provide as a service provider to the schools is clinical placement. So we, like a program like midwifery at Georgetown, you're like, well, how would you do midwifery online? You don't want to go to the midwife that delivered the virtual baby, right? So the fact is we find a local placement for you and you have to deliver 30 babies to graduate. It's a really complicated, hard part of our job. Well, in social work, the second year of the program is in the field. And so as a new social worker, you go out into the field. And if you think about what a social worker is dealing with, somebody with PTSD returning from the war, somebody that lost everything in a fire. I mean, these people are, it's tragic. And that social worker you put out there in the field and they're like, oh, that's super stressful. So what the dean did is she embraced the online format. She hired actors to portray people with a particular condition, and she puts them in the live environment with a professor and a student to observe, and it is brilliant. It's called the virtual field practicum. So it's her belief that by the time they do the second placement in the field, they are substantially more prepared for those conversations. So I love that. And then one I would point out that UNC is doing, which is called MBA for Life. If you enroll in and graduate from the program like I'm about to, I can go back and take any class permanently.
On campus or online?
Online. You also can do it on campus. I think what's happening now is the line between the two is blurring. If you think about my job, in 20 years, there won't be online students and on-campus students. They'll just be students, and it's going to take time because, schools are slow to change. But if I could comment on that, I feel like another thing people don't understand about higher education, they say fear of change, fear of change. They all have to be disrupted. Everybody has to be disrupted all the time. The reality is, would you want to hear every day you go to work that everybody just wants to disrupt you? It's not fear of change, it's fear of loss. These schools have done this incredibly well for an extremely long time. If you look at the outcome associated with these programs. So I've found you don't get to these great schools as faculty unless you're really pretty darn smart. And that means you're open to new information, typically. Not with every single faculty member. And so as you present more and more information about how online can sort of be a positive and not an immediate negative, we found that people really jump on board in a way that's pretty profound.
Mm-hmm. And I want to, speaking of online degrees and credentialing, I remember reading a story in the Wall Street Journal last year, and it quoted a lot of recruiters who were saying, online degrees just don't carry the same amount of weight as a brick and mortar degree.
Yep.
So have you seen a shift or a change in that, or what do you think needs
Well,
to change?
our approach has been from the beginning. This is not an online degree or an on-campus degree. It's the degree. It's the exact same degree. When I graduate in December, I walk in April. I will walk. I will have an amazing celebration. And, that degree will be proudly displayed in my office. And the person next to me that went to Chapel Hill's campus program, it is the exact same degree. The issue for online education, people often ask me, what's the hardest part of your job, is preconceived notions of online education are terrible. Yeah. People still think it stinks. And so I feel like we're a little bit where online dating was a decade ago. Now, I've been together with my wife for 26 years, so I'm not on Tinder. But the reality is, 10 years ago, if you weren't married, it was scandalous if people knew you had a profile. Whereas today, it's not only not scandalous.
Tinder, OkCupid.
There's Farmer Date. Farmer Date, right? So it's completely normal. And I do think online education will go through some form of that transformation over the next decade. It'll take time.
What do you think it will take, though?
Well, a good example, when we announced Yale, that was pretty big news.
Yeah.
Because it was an Ivy, and the Ivies haven't done that much. I found it a little bit interesting because we had already had Berkeley and Northwestern and WashU, and these are all incredible schools. So I was like, oh, okay, but we're thrilled to have Yale. But that day, that was probably our best press day. I was getting ready to go on, I forget what it was Bloomberg or something. And when I was getting ready that morning in the hotel, on the ticker was a story about University of Phoenix losing half its students. So like my best press day, I'm not on the ticker.
No.
So unfortunately, that is still sort of the dominant theme. Yeah, you can hear me though, right?
Can you hear him in the
Okay.
mic? Okay.
I have big ears, so it's just kind of coming off.
That's okay.
So that's it's going to take time. It will take time to change people's perceptions. But I think what's interesting to the marketers in the room is I think if you look at the work we're doing for the schools, the most important thing is 83% graduation, high job placement rates, high net promoter scores. Like the outcomes metrics are critical. But when you get to the business side, we just passed 1.24 billion in tuition generated. It's getting big.
Yeah.
So what's interesting is what we found is in the schools that we've been partnering with for some time now, USC, Georgetown, and Chapel Hill, the regional bias associated with the school has decreased by something between 20 and 30%, which we think you can make an argument, when somebody's typing in Chapel Hill MBA, that branded search that you would see, the fact that we're improving that outside of region, I think you can make an argument that we're actually improving the brands. And that's a pretty big deal, So over time, as more and more schools do it, my advice to the people in the room is if your university isn't running an online program, whether they do it with 2U or not, our model doesn't work for everybody. We think it's really important that people continue to embrace it. This is a massive secular change that will occur over the next couple of decades. And, interesting, higher ed is global brands, but often regional businesses. And so I think over time, you can have a pretty profound effect if you're willing to sort of put your neck out there and lead change. That's the one thing, the single most common denominator among our partners is that they are leading change in a way that is really hard and sort of non-trivial.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of outcomes, a lot of students now are concerned about the ROI of their degree
Sure.
or how much they're going to be paid because they majored in X degree. How are you seeing a change in the way that schools are marketing their programs based on that?
Sure. We believed as a company in the early days that there would be this long-term correlation between our financial results and student outcomes. And we had to sell venture capitalists on this idea because each 2U program today, if we bring in a new program in a vertical, so like we just launched speech pathology at NYU, in a new vertical for 2U, it'll be a $10 million net negative cash investment over the first 4 years of the program's life. So very expensive. And the reason I go there is you kind of have to believe long-term in the outcome. And so fortunately today we have all the proof points, but back then we didn't. And there's no doubt that there's not a single school in our portfolio that would have signed up with us if we were not really, really focused on the outcome. And sure, we market that because the students do care. I think over time, what the kind of data-driven career focus that you see in the MBA programs will extend all through programs in different forms in higher ed. Now, one note is we're all graduate programs, with the exception of an RN to BSN program, which leads to an MSN program. So it's sort of an undergrad program that acts like a grad program. So 2U operates in graduate education, not undergrad. And so most of the stories that sort of dominate the press are about undergraduate education. I can tell you right now, the outcomes across our partner portfolio are pretty fantastic. And ultimately, that gets me up in the morning. That's really what this story is all about. So, you do have to market it.
And what about universities themselves? Are you seeing a shift at all there in the way that they're marketing their programs?
Well, people in this room know it really is about the data. Oh, thank you. Just toss it over. There we go. Hello.
All right.
So it is about the data, ultimately. And I look back to how we were doing it in 2008, and with emerging platforms like LinkedIn or Facebook, we sort of got away with it because of the early stage of those businesses. But today, it is 100% data-driven. So we just unveiled this thing we call Time Machine, where we can track microtransaction with a prospect all the way through to their graduation. So literally, every single microtransaction, and when I say transaction, I don't mean dollars. I mean anything they did with us all the way through their life, to the point where did they speak to somebody, how long did they speak to them, where were they, what device were they using, all the way down to did they enroll, did they attend class, how many assignments did they do. And what's great about this data is it will allow us over time to improve the outcomes downstream. And the reason that's so important to us is we share tuition revenue over the life of the contract, but ultimately if a student enrolls in a program and drops out, we have a really bad financial outcome. It's for us, the financials of the business are even driven by the long-term graduation rate. So if we can improve the efficiency of the marketing funnel, that's great, but we also want to improve the efficiency of the student's life.
And the outcomes. And I want to talk a bit about the digital economy. What do you think are the needs of the digital economy, and what can universities do to best prepare students for this 21st century?
Well, so if you look across our portfolio, once you have a school that starts to think differently, you see great opportunities for our Berkeley data science program. Probably the best example. That dean kind of forced me to do it. Her name's Ano Saxenian. She's fantastic. And at that point, data science wasn't a whole thing. And now that seems funny because you can't open your iPad without reading a story about big data. Mm-hmm. And so the Master of Data Science at Berkeley was a brand new degree. It was a green field. That deal died twice while we were cutting the deal. It was a crazy process. But ultimately, now that program is driving really high quality results for those students. People are getting poached while they're still in the program by employers because it's such a needy area. So now we've rolled different data science programs out. So we have one at Syracuse. Business analytics is also something. So if data science at Berkeley is sort of neener and way out here on the coding side, business analytics is more what you would almost want every business executive to have this data background. And so that program, we have one with American University, and that's doing really well. So over time, being able to sort of embrace new degree opportunities driven by jobs. Now, one of the things as a public company, I meet with investors all the time, so I had a bunch yesterday morning, and I have to often explain to investors, like, hey, the whole world is not actually just about business, right? Mm-hmm. There's a massive need for nurses, and there's a massive need for speech therapists. As a son, my youngest is now 11, but when he was little, when his ears were clogged, so as a 1-year-old, he had all kinds of problems speaking. And it was impossible. I live in Annapolis, Maryland, to find a speech pathologist in Annapolis, Maryland. So it's a great example of an opportunity for 2U where there's a shortage, there's real need, there's great jobs available, there's not that many programs, and because of the clinical placement component, no one wants to touch it online. So that's a great program for us. The placement operation is a bit of a moat around the company in some ways because we just passed 28,000 clinical placements. So, that kind of scale of placement, how are you going to find a speech pathology placement in Oregon, if you're NYU? So all those types of opportunities, universities do over time react to the job market without question, and I think they're starting to become more nimble in those reactions.
Mm-hmm. And what are you seeing on the horizon for online learning, and where's 2U going?
Well, I do feel genuinely blessed, I don't say that lightly, to be running this company at this moment. It's the right team, the right time, a little bit of luck thrown in, that's part of life. This is my third venture-backed company, and it's the only one that worked. So the first one I ran for a decade, and I laid off 80% of my workforce 8 years in. That's no fun, by the way. So when you hear all the VCs out in the Valley talking about failing fast and go fail forward, I feel like they've never failed. So that's easy to say because when you go through it, it's no fun. But I learned a ton. And one of those things I learned is the power of focus. I joke about focus being kind of like and now I'm dating myself here, but the movie Poltergeist, when Carol Ann, the little girl, and the little heavyset lady saying, Carol Ann, don't go into the light. For an entrepreneur, the new thing is the light. You can't help yourself because you're kind of wired that way. And then you go into the light and then that monster eats you, And so I learned to be careful with the brand new thing all the time. So how does that answer your question? At 2U, there are so many degrees for us to do at the master's level that in the short term, next couple of years, we will increase our number of programs per year, and we will stay really focused on that. Why? It's really rare to find a company that has this kind of organic growth potential. Mm-hmm. As a public company CEOs, one of the reasons so much M&A is done is you're constantly looking for growth, and we're not focused on M&A at all because the reality is we've got a great growth opportunity in our core business. Now, if you go out a decade, of course, we will have diversified the business more, but all within higher ed, we really believe that a big part of the culture at the company is really about higher education. It's kind of a neat place to visit because you've got the NYU team and because they're all dedicated. And so this section of the office is purple and over here is cardinal and gold and over here is Carolina blue. And but these people are all fully committed to those schools. And so we'll stay pretty darn focused over the short term.
Cool. And just an announcement for the audience, we're going to be taking questions, so start thinking of those, write them down.
Bring it on, people.
But as we're just, one of the last questions I had, if you have someone who's going to be, starting an education institution today, how would you advise them to get started, and what should their focus be? That's
a great question. So I think you really have to believe that, you are able to make the transition now to the digital environment without sacrificing quality. I mean, that's really the key. Is that this modality is not only not going away, it's here and it's happening today. So when people talk about the change coming and will schools ever change, people don't write stories about the change. People write stories about disruption once again. And I happen to believe that we are disrupting the delivery model in a very profound way. But the scale that's being achieved at quality is the key. So if I was starting a new institution, I would definitively be thinking of them as students, not whether they're online or on campus. And I would have that as a core part of your strategy. I believe the schools, if the 1800s were about Cambridge and Oxford and the 1900s were about the US Ivy League, the schools that do it this way are going to win in this century. So, I would encourage that new leader to go for it.
And what about, do you have any plans to expand globally? Or how do you?
Well, we just hired a guy named Lord David Willits, who was the Minister of Universities in the UK. He's a fantastic guy, love him. And so that was certainly a signal to people that we do believe this is a global story. Yeah. We're kind of overwhelmed with demand right now from the US. When I say demand, I mean university demand. So in the short term, there's not an upcoming announcement about a UK school. That was sort of a step towards building the right strategy long term. But we do think it is a global phenomenon. I mean, this notion of people wanting access to high quality schools, but not being able to pick up their life and move, that's a worldwide thing. We feel pretty confident. We have one non-US partner, Monterrey Tech in Mexico, and so we proved to ourselves with that one opportunity that it is global. So we're based in Landover, Maryland, right outside of DC. So when David came to Landover, it was like the Lord is in Landover, and so he's great for us. But the reality is, it's a step. It's not. You won't see us.
So not just yet.
Not yet.
Okay. All right. With that, I would love to take some questions from you all. I guess just raise your hand, and I believe there's someone in the audience who will hand you the mic. Thank you. Don't be shy. Just out back here.
You can. Yeah, go for it. So I think that what's interesting about even the spend itself is obviously we spend with LinkedIn and we do Google AdWords, of course, but ultimately, it's a tremendous amount of inbound marketing where we're creating high quality content to try to drive somebody that might be interested in a particular program. And so SEO is critical, phenomenal team doing that. And so if you don't, I learned the hard way that because the programs are super selective, way back in the day when we were doing this, it was really difficult to even figure out what marketing was driving the student. That was a huge issue. So today, the models that we have underneath the system are constantly optimizing that spend based on that data prediction. So like our team could show you this sort of heat map by program. It's pretty cool. But it's really important because my job for my university partners, when we sign, when a new board of trustees or a new president or a new provost makes a decision to work with 2U, we've made a commitment to them that we are indeed going to scale their program, but without sacrificing quality. So same admissions requirements as the campus. And so to do that, you got to get really good at the predictive engine. Otherwise, by definition, you cannot spend the marketing the right way. So I would be embarrassed to tell you back in 2008 what the marketing spend actually looked like. So that was a series of real lessons learned. Brought in a team at that time from Capital One, and you think, well, what does Capital One have to do with higher ed? If you know anything about the story of Capital One, it was all about data. And so the marketing team is filled with incredible data-oriented people, some of whom are in the room, and also the creative side. So this one that we just did that I love for MBA at UNC is 100 years of feminism based on women's suits, women's attire, and it's just brilliantly done, and it got huge placement. And so it drives positive SEO to the right consumer, but ultimately you have to know who the right consumer is, and that all comes down to the prediction itself.
Any other questions? Yes.
You can shout, I can hear you.
Hi. Is this on? Okay.
Yeah.
How do you address retention? So it may not be a problem in the elite schools where you have very dedicated students, but I'm at Penn State. We have a lot of online programs. Half of our students are undergraduate. So how do you address retention?
So, we happen to build, by the way, Penn State, great example of a school that really did lead change way before anybody was willing to do it. So I give you guys a ton of credit. But, we think the live instruction that we offer through the platform has a huge amount to do with it. So right now, 83% of students are either graduated, still enrolled. I believe that has, in some ways, less to do with the elite factor and more to do with how they're engaging. So it's super engaged. The no back row hashtag, I happen to, for years we tried to figure out how to explain to people, and I think no back row is an excellent example of a great marketing slogan that went beyond marketing to really something much more profound. It's kind of a way of life. And so in these programs, you're super intimate. That no back row is very real. Like as a student in the program, I can tell you some days you want a back row because if you have not done your work before you get to class, super obvious, like within minutes. So the engagement level is extremely high, and then we have a very dedicated team of support. So student support is a big part of, we don't have 1,100 employees just because we love hiring people. It's high touch for a reason, and we think that high touch ultimately drives strong retention. So in some ways, more so than whether the program is, quote, elite. We have some wonderful schools all over the country in different disciplines that often even have a struggle on campus where, nursing inherently has lower retention in some places than a data science program or an MBA program. And, our nursing programs have really high retention. So I do think the modality is a big factor.
I think we have time for one or two more questions. We're in the second row.
Hi, good morning. I'm Chris Cormus from Georgetown, but from
Hi.
the business school. How do you work with the on-campus marketing and communications programs, which are promoting the on-campus degrees?
So, our job is really to promote, when we sign, like we work with Pat Clunan in the nursing program, the dean at the nursing school, great dean, actually about to celebrate their 5-year anniversary with us. So our job is to promote the school in a lot of ways. Now we do a tremendous amount of marketing on a degree, of course, But ultimately, what happens across the portfolio is typically all the boats rise because we're promoting the school really actively. So every aspect of 2U's business, if I took you through the value chain and I talked about content development, or I talked about placement, or I talked about student support, and of course, student acquisition, all of that is hand in glove with the school. I mean, it's not our brand, it's your brand. So not only does the school have to approve everything, but it really does become, I mean, we are codependent. I mean, one of the reasons I hesitate using the word vendor and I prefer partner is, vendors don't put $10 million into something. Vendors, it's a different relationship. This really is a partnership. And the interests are aligned long term. I mean, the best contracts in the world are about alignment of interests, and I happen to think that our contracts really create the right alignment of interest. But it's hard. So there are moments where we might want to do something that might have a positive effect, but it's not right for the school. And so the school not only has to approve everything, but I'd say the best example of the codependency is like, we just did this really neat piece of content for the analytics program at American, where we did a data visualization of the top box office actors for Star Wars. And Forbes picked it up. And so it's great placement, perfect links, driving excellent SEO in a targeted fashion. The content is a great opportunity for us to engage with the actual faculty. So I think the content itself that drives a lot of the inbound, the better our relationship with the school, the more likely we're driving the right kind of content that will drive the right kind of marketing outcome. So it's pretty hand in glove.
All right, I think, are we at time? Or do we have time for one more?
One more? Somebody want
One more?
to throw one in real fast?
Here. Oh, I'm right here.
So you mentioned that not all schools are the right fit for you. What is the right fit for you in terms
So
of
the data engine I talked about, we ultimately built an algorithm that helps us predict enrollment at the program level. And a lot of lessons learned in that. So we now have a prediction for any program that we might go and build. And if it's a program in a vertical we are already operating, it's an excellent prediction. If it's a program in a new vertical, it's directionally still very good. So we feel like we're not guessing anymore. So in the world of online program managers, we actually feel like there is a lot of guesswork. And one of the reasons you end up with people often not being happy is, this, my job is to hit whatever target I've told the schools I'm going to hit at their quality level. So that sort of data orientation really does apply directly to program selection. Now, when I say that, I don't want to make it sound like we think we're God's gift to education. Like the reality is it's got to work both ways. So you look for not only the kind of opportunity that we think can warrant the investment that 2U would make, but the leadership team's a huge part of it. And I'm not saying that to be kind to my partners. Like I'll end with one quick story. One dean of ours, when we signed the deal, we went out for dinner to celebrate that we were going to do this. And he said to me, we looked at everybody else, and I didn't know that, And I was like, oh. So we talked about that. And he's like, so there's one particular firm came in and told me that they could bring me online, and it was pretty convincing, and they were good. You came in and told me you could make me great in the 21st century. He's like, what would you buy? And I was like, that's the guy, like that, or the gal. That's what we need, is somebody who's willing to sort of make that commitment to blur the line between online and on campus and make the students equal. It sounds, fuzzy, but it's not. It comes down to institutional will. 2U, the story of 2U is a story of institutional will more than the story of technology, marketing, startup, any of these things. It's really about a great institution being willing to sort of step out and make these students equal. So I need both. I need a good business opportunity for both sides, and I also need the right team on the other side of the table.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for listening. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you for having me.
Hopefully there's something that you guys have taken away. Thank you.